So welcome back, everybody. So this session now is really a little bit about are the NRENs up to the challenge? We heard some of the challenges this morning, and we're going to look at a few interesting different dimensions of what the NRENs are facing and doing. So our first speaker is Erwin Bloemink. So Erwin has worked for a number of years in both the private sector and the public sector in a consulting role, principally helping to define vision and strategy. 1998, he prepared Gigaport, in which SurfNet made a major step forward in network development. And in 2006, Erwin joined the SurfNet executive and management team and became responsible for many areas, including innovation. So since summer 2012, Erwin is SurfNet's CEO. So Erwin, please.
Thank you, David. Who has attended Eric Huizer's talk yesterday? A few people. Eric always ends his talks with this slide, and I thought, why wait another 20 minutes to show this slide? And there's another message hidden in it, and that's our two talks are a sort of diptych and are joined together. Basically, I'm going to tell three stories. A proud story about higher education, NRENs and the internet. A story about SurfNet moving from emergent strategy towards shaping the future. And an evolving story of our relevance as NRENs at risk and the need for international collaboration. The community of higher education and research we serve has a long history. It dates back at least to 400 years before Christ. And there were always places in which people gathered to study and learn, and which we call schools. Later there were facilities like libraries and large instruments that attracted our community. And as I told in my opening speech, connectivity is the engine of creativity and innovation. And the proximity of the right people, knowledge, and instruments is key. In other words, collaboration is the stuff of growth. And science has always made extensive use of telecommunications technologies, ranging from postal services to telephony and others. And they used it all. And then came along the internet. The internet is defined by our community themselves, and our community kept pushing its development until these days. And the NRENs, well, they lay down the groundwork as platforms for innovation. And it led to a massive uptake of the internet technology in society, driving down costs and creative, massive, unconstrained innovation. And I'd like to show this picture to you. On the horizontal axis, we see the innovation cycle from research via pilots to market. And with market here, I mean the commercial availability of services. And pilots here are not meant the day-to-day pilots we always do as NRENs every day. That is only part of what I'm in here. It is about providing the pilot plant, the proving ground for new ICT infrastructure. Yes, for the users they are real services, but they are delivered by the people, you here all in the room, who are fault-tolerant. And these are services our community needs, but the market does not deliver yet. That's the horizontal axis. The vertical axis, I show three layers. And traditionally, the NRENs develop and provide a network and do some application work. And now there's a trend of extending the network towards connecting infrastructure that includes at least identity, authentication, authorization, provisioning, etc. And as Steve Wolf mentioned this morning, computational network and data and storage architecture are converging. And we have to program everything and be able to act as an integrated system. Well, as you gathered already, our impact as NRENs is well beyond our community. While we functioned as a pilot platform rolling out ever more capacity and services, we also connected the advanced research and infrastructure together. And we functioned as an engine for innovation in research and education applications. And we boosted innovation towards the market. And you may be aware that most of the applications that we use on the internet today are incubated in our community. Whether it be instant messaging, video, etc., it's all coming from our community. And we helped apply ICT innovation for society and economy. And that's a job well done. And we live happily ever after. But I'll come back to that later on. Well, what is strategy? That's the second story. Well, strategy should be about shaping the future. And because the future won't wait, it will always take shape. And when we think about strategy, we mostly think about strategy as a plan, as deliberate, as defined. But that is not always the case. And it definitely should not be limited to that. When I joined SurfNet's executive management team in 2006, strategy development meant the answering of questions by the managing directors. And I called it deliberately emergent. Today we have another process which is much more inclusive and continuous and includes much more soft angles like values. And in that we try to balance the deliberate part of strategy with providing enough room for emergent strategy. And when you start to think about formalizing your strategy, you have to be very aware of a few things. The first one is that, as Tim Marshall likes to say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's very easy to define a strategy and say that's the way forward, but you have to handle culture as well, because the organization is moving in a different direction probably than you want to go. And from a management perspective, many people like to think that structure follows strategy. Well, to be honest, in everyday practice, strategy is defined by the structure, and the structure leads the way forwards. I think I hit the wrong button. Yes, it's again. Strategy is not limited to analysis and planning. It's about crafting, and craft evokes traditional skill, dedication, perfection through the mastery of detail. And what springs to mind when you think about strategy as crafting is not so much thinking and reasons, as well as involvement, a feeling of intimacy and harmony with the materials at hand, developed through long experience and commitment. And formulation and implementation merge into a fluid process of learning through which creative strategies evolve. So, if we talk about strategy development from a crafting perspective, it's about shared understanding of who we are and what we contribute, about a shared understanding of trends and challenges we face, and it's about adapting our activities, our structure, our culture, our financing accordingly. And therefore we have to talk a lot, not only about strategy in a very strict sense, but about our mission, our vision, our ambition, about our values, about our position in the larger events, about trends we see evolving, and about our structure. And we have to create stories, pictures, and experience to be able to lead the way forwards. I'll show you some pictures from SurfNet's strategy, and it's only part of it, and I'll only tell something about a few of the slides I will show. The first one is very important, and that's one about what is our ambition? What are we here for? And that's, well, we're here for researchers, instructors, and students have to work together simply and effectively with the aid of ICT. ICT comes last in this sentence, and that's on purpose. It's all about our users and how they can easily work together with ICT. This is a very boring slide, but very important from a structure perspective. This is how the SURF organization is organized. And the SURF organization is owned by the Institute for Higher Education and Research in the Netherlands. And we have a general board with 40 board members of the institutes in it. And we have an executive board, which consists of 8 board members of institutes. And then we have several working companies. I like this slide a lot better because it says something more about what we do. And then you see some nice pictures, and then this slide has been drafted by Harold Teunissen, who's talking in a different session at this same moment. And there you see that a SurfNet is connecting its users, and it's very nicely visualized by that. And we have SurfMarket, who negotiates deals with the Microsoft, Adobe's, Elsevier's, Kluwer's, etc. And there the institutes can buy these services, etc. In another way, the first slide I showed about enabling simple, effective collaboration with ICT. This is another take on that on a global scale. And Steve Wolf definitely got it right when he talks about team science on a global scale, and that we have to think beyond NRANs and go towards GRANs. And that is what this slide says. And not only from a networking perspective, but also with integration of facilities like supercomputing and large-scale instruments. And how should it look like from a user perspective, which is very important because we work for the users. It should be very simple for the users, and all these networks and instruments within the core should not be visible to the users how that works. You don't want to have to look at the engine all the time when you work. I spoke about values, and values are very important to be able to steer your organization. And last year we set up a project to define our values. And I didn't define our values. They were defined by all the SurfNet people. And they came up with 4 words which have a very rich meaning within SurfNet. And I'm not able to bring that in a very short talk. It's about connecting, trust, pioneering, and passion. And you have to experience what that means. And these are the pictures. And if you have worked with SurfNet, you might recognize some of the people in these slides. Once upon a time, we, the NRANs, were driving the development of the internet in capacity and functionality. But the world is changing, and Eric presented this slide yesterday and continued with paradigm shifts in research and education, leading to a paradigm shift for NRANs. And Steve Wolf this morning spoke about globalization, team science, and big data as the big drivers in that. That creates new opportunities for research and education and for NRANs. And it also creates new ways of having impact on R&D and for society. But we aren't alone anymore in driving the internet, and that's true for quite some time now. Our aim is to deliver value to our community, and for that we have to rethink what we are, for who we work, how we add value, and how we organize ourselves. And I will highlight 2 challenges we as SurfNet face and how we cope with them, and where we need international collaboration to be more effective. The first one is adding value over what commercial organizations deliver. From a situation in which the research and education community was traditionally in the lead, we have moved to a world where the consumer market is leading the way forward. However, the demands for high-end research and the specific demands for research and education are not met in an effective way in the consumer market. And so we use the market's potential by making the consumer services available to our user communities on the user community's terms. So pricing, legal terms, and integration with institutional systems. And in that we work very closely with our sister organization SurfMarket, who is very good in negotiating with these parties. And we do not enter the rat race with these companies, but actively phase out services that they can deliver better than we can. And so we keep our focus on where we can add value and we can deliver real new things to our community. And we focus on interconnecting the commercial consumer services, the institutional IT services, and the high-end services delivered by, for example, supercomputer services, supercomputer centers for the benefit of our user community. So we also have a very important integration role. What can we do internationally? Well, the first one is that we can do some kind of demand aggregation. We could add value to our community in terms of pricing, in terms of legal terms, in terms of integration with the institutional systems, with commercial providers on an international scale. And that is exactly what we are working on in the Global Services Delivery Program, and also within the GN3 Plus Cloud project. Another thing we can do is specialize ourselves in several services. So specific high-quality services, we should not deliver each NREN separately. We can deliver that to the other NRENs, but we have to come up with a model to be able to do that. And the third one, we should make identity management work globally, and that is also something we are working on. The thing is, we are only scratching the surface currently. If we want to make a difference, we need to move faster and way beyond identity management only towards open connects and create a truly international demand aggregation and mutual service delivery infrastructure. So we have lots of work to do. The second challenge is reaching the end users. The institutes serve shareholders, SurfNet shareholders, through their governing boards, as I showed you in the slide. And they are also our customers through their IT departments. However, the main added value we deliver to the end users, the researchers, the instructors, and the students. So how do we reach them? And the IT department's role is shifting from delivering services themselves towards an environment in which they manage other services from outside their organization. At the same time, users are bypassing their IT department and for their most important IT services. And researchers influenced by, for example, multidisciplinary research, hyper-specialization and EC framework programs are increasingly working together across organizational boundaries, both in flexible groups, in more formal virtual organizations, and in joint research and education programs. That was the thing Steve Wolf was talking about in his team science part of his talk. And these collaborations also extend beyond our research and education environments towards business and government and across national and intercontinental boundaries. The question is, the institutional IT landscape could get out of control in the area of responsibility for privacy, for data ownership, for confidentiality, and from a cost perspective. So we cannot let it go to the market completely. We have to have some control points available. So we work together with both the IT department and the user communities and are actively bringing these together. And we collaborate, and that's probably what you saw already on a previous slide. We worked very actively together with the supercomputing facilities and the grid facilities in the Netherlands. What we do internationally is that we export some of the things we are working on, such as the Enlighten Your Research contest, and we have set up together with some other partners, the first Enlighten Your Research global activity. We participate in the international energy, high physics, and astronomy communities. We try to facilitate collaboration, organization across our boundaries. But to be honest, we need you to really reach out to our international users and deliver the service they need and the support they need. So that brings us to the final question. How do we shape the future as European and global NRENs? Are we shaping the future, or is the future shaping us? Do we have a shared understanding of what we contribute? Do we have a shared understanding of trends and challenges? Do we adapt our activities, structure, culture, financing, etc. accordingly? Do we have a strategic conversation? Do we create stories, pictures, and experiences? Is our technology-driven, European Commission obeying culture eating our strategy for breakfast? Is our current structure sufficient to define our joint strategies, or do we need to change structures first? Do we add value over what commercial organizations deliver? Can we reach the end user? Will we happily live ever after? Well, that's up for the next session in this room at 2 o'clock with the promising title, Making the Future Happen. And Tim Marshall will lead us through that. And I will thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Owen. So, who's got the first controversial question for Owen? Nobody? Oh, good. We have one right here. Otherwise, I've got a very controversial one.
Keep asking questions.
It's Meoli Kashorda from Kenya Education Network. I saw your slide about adding value that commercial operators can do. Mm-hmm. What is it that SAFNet is doing that the commercial operators can do today?
Well, where the added value comes from is the way we are positioned in our community. We are part of the community. So that's the basis. Then we have this thing in our community that has a much higher bandwidth requirement, collaboration requirement across organizational boundaries that most other organizations don't have. So what we are currently focusing on is high bandwidth, is integration of the different e-infrastructure parts. So we talk about the networking, we talk about data, we talk about supercomputing. We talk also about the integration from all these commercial service providers into the identity management system of the institutes themselves, so that the users don't have to give away their credentials, but they can stay at their institutes. And not only identity management, but also group management. So if we here work together on a subject, we might want to share some files. We might want to do some video conferencing, etc. If we have to set up each and every time in each service the group we have, that's a waste of time, especially if you have to do real group management, if it's a fluid group in which people go in and out. So that's another one. It's also about negotiating the deals with these commercial providers. It's about creating new services that the market isn't delivering, creating new services that the market is delivering, but not on the terms that our community needs, from a data ownership, a data confidentiality perspective, for instance, or from a pure capacity perspective, from a financial perspective. We talk about very large data sets, for instance, and the cost model for that might be very different from what Amazon, etc., are delivering from what we can afford. So.
Good morning. My name is Yves Pelbrin from UNIS. There are many organizations dealing with IT in the university. For instance, you have international organizations such as AUR, from the Rector organization. You have an organization called ADTU, which has to do with distance learning. You have other institutions like myself, and you have national organizations. And how do you deal with that at the level of the NRN and an organization such as Terena? Because it seems that a number of end-user organizations completely ignore the role of the other organization. It's not a point only for SURF and for Terena. It's also for everybody. Everybody seems to ignore the other actors.
I think you make a very important point. And if we look at how ICT for our community has evolved, it's been based on the entrepreneurial spirit, and we have set up all these structures and organizations to cope with the demands of the users. And I think it's now time to take a look at the landscape and try to come up with a structure that works in the long-term perspective. Because as NRENs and as GRENs, we really need to have a high involvement with our user community. But if the user community is very scattered around and cannot speak with one voice, that's a problem. If the end user community is scattered around and talks from one perspective, you don't get the economies of scale we can jointly work out together. So there's work to do on that. And hopefully in the 2 o'clock session we'll get some ideas on how to move forwards in that area. Time's up.
Any more questions for Owen? We maybe have time for one more question. I don't want to let him off too easily.
I was afraid of your questions.
If not, we'll thank Owen. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so now it's a great pleasure to introduce Sergio Andreossi. He's been involved in grid activities since the very early days, since 2002. He's been very active in the Open Grid Forum, in the standardization activities, especially in the area of information modeling. In 2010, he joined the organization EGI.EU to steer the strategy and policy activities of the European grid infrastructure, and he's working to that end also with Helix Nebula, the initiative for integrating commercial cloud providers and publicly funded e-infrastructures. He's also participated in the e-fiscal project to assess the cost of publicly funded computing in Europe. And this is the main theme of this presentation. Thank you, Sergio.
Thank you, David. Welcome, everybody. And so the theme of this conference is about innovating together, and we saw many presentations about how we can continue to deliver value to the users, how we can exploit the emerging technologies to find new ways to create new services to meet emerging needs of the user communities. But we shouldn't forget that all the technologies that we use has a cost. And this presentation is not about what new values we could create to users, but it's about trying to not forget this cost item that anyway is always part of when designing a business model for new services. And I was involved in the e-fiscal project, which is a small EC-funded project that lasted 18 months and ended in the last January. So here I will present the final findings of the project. I will go through the objectives, through the approach that we undertaken in this project, and to present the findings and what we learned from this experience. In particular, the goal of the fiscal project was to understand what is the cost of public funded high-throughput computing and performance computing infrastructures in Europe. And more or less, each organization has an understanding how much does it cost individually, but once we provide the federated services that are pulled together from different countries, different institutions, we want to understand globally how we do together, how we cost efficient, how do we compare with, for instance, commercial cloud offerings, and to derive from this experience some recommendations we can provide to decision makers or to user communities. And the main focus we are not focusing on extracting very detailed costs, we are focusing on more approximations who can help, for instance, assessing if there are economy of scales across the sites, to perform comparisons with commercial cloud offerings, and also to, for instance, to define pricing models if you are moved to a pay-as-you-go service provision in the future. One possible target audience for this study is the European grid infrastructure, for which I work. And just to give you a picture, so European grid infrastructure is a federated infrastructure with resources from 350 data centers spread in Europe, from very small to very large, and aggregates 470,000 cores, CPU cores. We have under 40 petabytes of disk and similar on tape. And in terms of collaboration, we follow a similar model like NREN's community. There are resource centers which belong to the national countries, and they are at the national level federated and affiliated to a national grid initiative, like we have NRENs. And then there is an overarching second-level federation, which is the EGA.EU, is a small foundation located in Amsterdam, who performs the European level federation. And we have around 20,000 users spread across 233 virtual organizations. So the focus of the e-fiscal study was mainly on computing. So we didn't focus about data, for instance, and also we didn't include the cost of the EU level federation. So when we started to investigate the scenario we are working in, we try to understand what are the constraints we are working in this environment. First of all, we are an easy project, and we need to knock at the door of different organizations and ask, could you please disclose with us the cost information because we want to perform this study? This is not an easy task because first, cost information are sensitive, and secondly, there may be NDAs with vendors who forbid to disclose this information. And third, given the size also of the sample, it was not possible to think about accessing detailed cost information. So the idea was to define a questionnaire, to provide a survey to the institutions and try to gain the trust to provide information to us. The idea was anyway to use the information aggregates and then publish only aggregate values, not individual even by countries, to guarantee anonymity and confidentiality. And also we wanted to, as there are many different funding sources, it was not possible, for instance, to go to the individual funders. And another constraint was, or another goal, let's say, was to consider all the cost items, even though the resource center doesn't pay for it, to have an estimation. For instance, a data center which is part of the university may not pay for the building where the data center is built, or may not pay the electricity bill because it's paid centrally. So anyway, it is paid, the electricity, but not directly from the data center. So sometimes it was difficult to understand, even for some data center, to extract exact cost information. But we wanted to have the full picture. Given the constraints, then there was the decision to be made about which costing methodology we adopt to perform this study. So on the horizontal axis, you have the time. You have past on the left and future on the right. And on the vertical axis, you have the detailed cost information you can collect. So on the top left, you see the full cost accounting, which is a methodology which is very precise in terms of the information it provides, you can obtain, but it requires access to the books, to the accounting books, and is very complex and lengthy. Then in the middle, on the right side, so the full cost account is backward-looking. Then we have total cost of ownership, which is a methodology used when you have to make an investment. You need to develop scenarios on the possible opportunities, and then based on these assumptions, you do a market research, you see the cost of products, the service, you make an estimation, you forecast how much will cost the service you want to provide. This is forward-looking. The goal of e-fiscal was, we have an infrastructure already running, we need to look at what has been spent. We are interested in estimation, in approximated costs. And so in the questionnaire, what we did, for instance, there were a question about So the focus of the cost, first of all, is 2010-2011, the period. And there were questions like, in these years, did you purchase new hardware? If so, please let us know how much did you pay. So this maybe it was a small fraction of what was in the data centers. But we use that value to annualize the cost as if the old data center was bought in that year. So to have more up-to-date cost information, let's say, and estimation of the whole cost. So that's why the e-fiscal methodology goes more for not very exact cost information, doesn't go to the books, ask information to the institutions, and there's a little bit forward-looking. And the advantage of this methodology is that try to balance the easiness of collecting information with accuracy, and try not to overload too much the collection of information from the institutions who decided to participate in this study. And also because anyway their participation was not rewarded in a way, so it was free participation. The time that they needed to spend to fill the questionnaire was not paid, let's say, so there was not directly involved. And also, our methodology is public, all the approach we used, and it's in public deliverables, public documents, so it's transparent and auditable, and also can be reused the idea was to provide an approach that can be reused by the other institutions in the future. So these are the steps that we went through. So basically, at the beginning, we started to understand what is the state of art of cost assessment for ICT and HPC and HTC resources. And we created a very rich state-of-art page you can access on the website. There are more than 40 papers from different countries. And then, given the state-of-art, we developed our cost model. And then we identified what our sample to focus on. We developed a questionnaire that was submitted to the various partners. And then we received the answers, we processed the answer, and we tried to extract some metrics, aggregate metrics that could lead us to understand the cost of the services in Europe. This is the structure of the cost that we use in the questionnaire. So you see in blue is the capital expenditure, while in red is more the operational expenditure cost items. Software cost in some paper was classified as a CapEx, in some others OpEx. We decided to classify it as an OpEx item. And if you go to the link below, you can find also all the detailed questions that we sent to the users, so you can access all detailed information that were asked to the participants. Oops, sorry. How many answers we got? So we got 28 answers from 16 different countries, so we have quite a good coverage. And most of the participants are were providing high throughput computing. Some had both high throughput and high performance computing. More half of the sites were affiliated to EGI. And concerning HPC and the praise area, only tier 1 center participated. Tier 0 in praise did not participate in this study because of NDA constraints with commercial providers. And 27% of sites were both in EGI and praise, and 17 were outside of both these initiatives. So there were also some resource centers who provide the input which is not federated nor in EGI and nor in praise. Here is main metrics that we extracted from this analysis. So we have the metrics we defined, and then we have for this we have average and median. So you can see, for instance, the rate between CapEx and OpEx is more or less 30 to 70%. And then personal cost usually is 50% of the whole service provision. And the cost per core hour in euro is, the median is 3 euro cents. And this has been normalized to the utilization, so estimating a utilization rate of 75% of the infrastructure. Just to give you an example, if you increase the utilization of the infrastructure, the cost would drop to 2 euro cents, 29, let's say. And in terms of cost per core in euro in 1 year, the average is, no, the median is 200 euro for the average CPU lives. The depreciation, we found out that usually the data centers depreciate on 5 years, while in literature is more 3 years was more the value we found was used. And the interconnect equipment is 10% of the hardware cost. Software cost is 2% median of the hardware. Salary, you can see the salary median also, around 50K, and PUE is 149, the median. And then what we observed, that what we could expect, that the more the larger the site is big, the more there is economy of scale in terms of the FTEs, so the manpower. So in proportion, you have less manpower needed. But this is what we could expect. So these are the main figures. Then when we came out, the step to compare these costs with a price from commercial cloud providers, that's not an easy task because we need to be sure that we are comparing the same things. And one thing is about performance, for instance. If I have one virtual machine running on a public fund infrastructure, and does it provide the same performance than one running on Amazon, for instance? So we did a very small scale benchmarking study. For HTC, we used the HEPSpec benchmarking suite. For HPC, the NAS parallel benchmark. We tried to create virtual machines similar to what you can find in terms of characteristics. And we found out that usually there is, when you go to, at least on Amazon, we found a performance degradation, for instance, in HTC around 27%, while for HPC it was bigger. And what we found out is typically if you if you overload the physical hardware with many virtual machines, then when you hit the maximum number of virtual machines, you observe this degradation. Anyway, we use these numbers to normalize the prices. And here we have an example, for instance. If you consider, so in blue you have the physical fundings. And in red you have the Amazon. This is for the on-demand instance, for instance, for the large and extra large sites. Normalizing the price to the degradation, you have that it's more expensive than e-fiscal. Keep in mind that we are comparing price with cost, so the price has also a profit margin. And also for the cluster compute, quadruple is much more higher. But usually on-demand instances are more expensive than reserved instances, because on-demand, it means that the provider cannot make any, all the risk about the service provision is on the provider, so you cannot make any capacity planning because you can go and leave whenever you want. So that's why the price is higher. While the next slides, where we have the reserved instance, in Amazon, for instance, you can subscribe for resources for a period of 3 years. So once you subscribe, you make a contract, you need to pay for that. Of course, you get lower prices. And these are the standard reserve instance is more comparable to e-fiscal, while still the cluster compute is more expensive. But more of this comparison you will find also in the final report. So next is about sustainability. The project is over. What's going to happen after? This was an interesting work anyway, because it would be useful to be continued. The value of this work increase if there is a regular data collection of this cost information, so that you can have a projection over time. So the final report will be published in July 2013, so in a month from now. So please go back to the website if you want to access it. We have a web tool that you can use to do your self-assessment of your data center, for instance. This web tool basically lets you enter all the cost items, and it will generate automatically a number of diagrams to compare the cost, the metrics with the e-fiscal findings. And also we launched a LinkedIn website, LinkedIn groups, to continue the discussion, start to create a community on experts around ICT cost assessments. You can join the LinkedIn group. And also within AGI, we have an initiative similar to for sure you're familiar with the Terena Compendium. Last year we launched our AGI Compendium to collect on a yearly basis information from all NGIs. And what we did, we plugged this questionnaire within the AGI questionnaire so that we can, in our community, we can keep up collecting this information. And also you can, if you want, you need a consultancy, you can contact the e-fiscal partners, and for sure some board partners will be more than willing to help you in this work. So what we learned from this experience? So first of all, it's not trivial to estimate the costs, because we are in a very highly heterogeneous environments. So there are different countries, different decisions on the hardware that have been purchased, different sites. There are issues with anonymity and confidentiality, so it was not very easy, and especially to fill the questionnaire, even though we tried to simplify, not to make it too hard for the participant, but many did not participate because it takes lots of time, especially because some institutions, they don't have very accurate accounting, so for which you just press a button and can extract the information. It takes time also from their side to make this work. Comparing with cloud price is also not easy. We try to make it as more meaningful as possible. We did this performance to perform the normalization. We try to find services which could be similar in a way. And also, we also need to keep in mind we're talking about cost, and price is different. There is a margin. Also, when you define a price, there may be different strategies which goes behind having a profit, for instance. And also, cost is different than value. We shouldn't forget that it should not be the only item for decision, but it is an important item to be considered. The results of this study should have been taken to decide if you should move from in-house computing to public cloud. That's a different exercise, because there are other dimensions, like there can be legal consideration. Even in the costing exercise, there is the concept of avoidable cost. Even though you move to cloud, some costs you will still incur on what is being considered in fiscal. And the impact, for instance, there is some studies already about this, the impact on personnel is not that, the saving of the personnel is not very high, because anyway, if you move to cloud, you have an infrastructure operating up to the virtual machine level, then the services you move on top, you need to manage yourself. And also to be able to obtain results, I mean, it's important to engage with policymakers and strategists in this work. So concluding, e-fiscal is the first approach, the first pioneer in a way, the costing of computing infrastructures, of federated computing infrastructures. And he provided a methodology as an output of this work that you can reuse to estimate the cost of infrastructures. He defined a set of metrics, and we identified that from 2010 to 2011, for instance, both CapEx and OpEx are decreasing as items. And the results, we compared also the results with the literature, and we found they are quite in line with what we found in other studies. And the issues that we found in this work is that, first of all, the cost structures within the data centers may be different. The depreciation rate is lower than what you find in the literature, 5 years instead of 3. And we found the economy of scales with the increasing of the size of the data centers, but in some cases that was not observable. And also the break-even point for in-house versus public cloud is very important, the level utilization of the infrastructure. What we found out that for HTC is around from 30 to 55%. That means that if you keep high utilization of infrastructure, of course you make more cost efficient the provision of your services, while for HPC it was lower. And then evaluating if moving to cloud is a different exercise. It is because there are other aspects to be considered, like as I mentioned before, legal, also the concept of unavoidable costs. And that's all for me. This is the detail from the project. So there were 4 partners. The cost expert was the Athens University of Economy and Business. EGI.eu performs as a gateway to the European grid infrastructure community, while NUI Galway was the gateway to the HPC community, and Emergence Tech was the partner for dissemination activities. The project, here you find more details about the project. It was just 18 months, and the effort, as you can see, it was just 33 PM. And also you find the links where you can keep in touch and find more materials about this work. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sergio. Any questions? Who wants to ask the first one? Nobody's concerned about the cost of their infrastructures? Apparently not. We have one question there.
Bob Day from Janet. I suppose a sort of fairly obvious question is, do you think that the methodology that you've developed for HPC will be easily transferable to high-performance networks, the sort that NRENs run? Should we be looking at this model and seeing whether that would help with our cost analysis? Because we certainly need to do that across NRENs, across Europe as a whole, and across GEONT.
Yes, definitely can be reused. In this way, there should be some work on the cost structure because the cost items will be a bit different. But the approach definitely can be reused, yes. And definitely I can give you the contacts of our accounting experts if you want to explore more this opportunity.
Any other questions for Sergio? No? Okay, if not, thank you very much, Sergio.
It's not very exciting topic. Thank you.
Okay, so now it is my pleasure to introduce Dave Lambert. For more than 30 years, he has a distinguished experience in advanced research and education networking and information technology fields with a whole range of universities, including Georgetown, Cornell, Indiana, as well as having many leadership positions in education technology associations. He became Internet 2's president and chief executive in 2010. And so with that, Dave, please.
Well, welcome, and I thank you very much for the invitation to come have an opportunity to speak to our colleagues at Terrain and in the European community. I think that the collaboration between the R&E communities in the US and Europe have resulted in some extraordinary accomplishments, and I think the opportunities we have to get together and try to align our strategies and visions and build our relationships are very, very important to moving forward. Now I need to make sure I can advance this thing without creating a problem. I'm going to talk today about NRENs. And, I spent a lot of time doing that, both when you do a job like I do, you sort of have to justify yourself. And so what you're going to hear is a very idiosyncratic view. It's my view. And it's shaped by, a lot of what I see happening in national research and education networks around the globe, as well as the one that I and my executive team are responsible for. It's sort of shaped by what I think are some particularly unique challenges that are developing in the space in which we've traditionally worked and will continue to work in the future. And it's also shaped a lot by opportunities that I think are unfolding. I have to say that this particular sort of presentation that I've been working on for a while was really instigated when I had an opportunity to someone asked me to make a case for NRENs, and I sort of tried to look and see, where's that done? And among the first documents I found was one that John Dyer at Terrain did a number of years ago, and I thought it was extraordinary. But as I looked at it, I think I don't remember exactly what year it was done, but it's at least 4 to 5 years old. As I looked at that, it became clear to me that as powerful a job as it did describing what national research and education networks were, it didn't really capture the broad array of things that national research and education networks around the world were really doing. And so what I've tried to do is sort of reach a little bit more deeply into this space. This is a little bit, as I said, experience, a little bit vision, a little bit maybe wannabe and wishing we were. At the same time, I think it represents a trajectory that many of you who work in research and education networks around the world are doing. First of all, let me make it very clear that when I talk about NRENs, I'm not talking so much about organizations, although I think we've created these organizations. I'm really talking about communities, because what national research and education networks are generally are communities of people who have organized their efforts around a common set of interests and needs and outcomes, and who very often create vehicles to enable them to move those things forward. And those include organizations who do things like build networks and build other services and build high performance computing centers. But really what NRENs are about is community. But as we look at sort of this NREN world, and needless to say, I'm a strong advocate of the role of NRENs in the world, and you're going to hear me talk a lot about that. It's important to stop and say, sort of, what does that mean today? What is an NREN not is, I think, kind of important for us to look at here. And over on the sort of left-hand side of this, you see a lot of things that NRENs have done in the past. We've grown from specialized regional ISPs into essential global platforms. We've become innovation incubators. Rather than supply side market players, we do a lot of that. I think there's a lot of evidence to indicate that we've become demand side market makers. We started out, I think, in the contract brokering business and have increasingly become sort of market aggregators that change our environments in very important ways. We started out in this thing sort of saw ourselves as knowledge carriers, but now I think increasingly we see ourselves and we're playing a role of knowledge multiplier. you know, as we've thought about these things in the past, we've been a provider of shrink-wrapped solutions, but you know, now we've sort of become an economic development engine. We've become a transformational vehicle. We've become a collaboration enabler. We've connected to broader communities and have become community developers. And then one I'm going to talk about a little bit that may not be quite so apparent to you is that I believe we've also become political stabilizer as a community. So let's sort of dig down into this a little bit here. I recognize that I'm the last speaker before lunch, which means I either have to be fast or I have to keep you distracted from your lunch. So I'm going to try to do both, and we'll see how that works out. So what does this NREN version 2? I think Steve used version 3 this morning, but we don't know what that means. But we're really talking about the future here looks like. In the first place, one thing is very obvious. NRENs are an essential global now platform for the R&E institutions and communities. It is essential to global representation and leadership. The platform, the innovation platform we put out there, encourages the development of new technologies, and we're going to talk more about that. We try to build transparent operations that mean easier solutions and avoidance of problems. We support sort of end-to-end domain science, and that's what I would call sort of our core business. And that core business from which we sort of sprang is the foundation that not only is this, is essential for the past, but it's essential for the future, because what we've learned from being this essential platform for research and science is that we're in a position where we are encountering the leading edge requirements. And by confronting those leading edge requirements, which is often very, very difficult for us to do, I am constantly amazed, if you look at what we've done, how often we solve secondary and tertiary levels of problems. And in fact, that often becomes, for the community writ broad, the biggest impact that we can have. If you look at the history of NCSA in Illinois, it's had this extraordinary impact as a national high-performance computing center. And you look at CERN and the enormous impact that it's had in advancing science, but for most of the people in the world, what has been done at those two centers that touch them the most with respect to the internet and the development and their ability to access knowledge? Two unintended consequences, okay? The internet browser and the World Wide Web. And so we often find that doing that basic mission, okay, which is so very important in and of itself, becomes important for other reasons. Becomes very important for other reasons. And in fact, we've become an innovation incubator. We facilitate development of advanced applications supporting global research and education. And while it emerges often from our core research and science work, it often goes out in other directions. And we find that it often has applications in other spaces. But the question is for us, why have we become such an incubator of innovation where, as Steve talked about this morning and my colleague Erwin talked about, it's easier to actually enumerate the current internet technologies that you use that were not incubated in higher education than those that work, because virtually everything that comprises the current internet service package that you use was incubated in the research and education environment. And why does that happen? We're not very good. No one's really good at predicting what an innovation is going to be, right? Who would have thought that the Harvard network, with all this abundant bandwidth that goes into the dormitories and probably a little more lax security regimen than one might want to have, would feed, if you believe the movie, and of course movies are always right, of course, would fuel a very self-centered young man who was very angry at his girlfriend, as I recall the story in the movie, and wanted to embarrass her in front of the entire Harvard community, succeeded in creating one of the great transformational pieces of technology in the world. So it's not about our ability to say, I'm going to plan this innovation. It's about our ability to create foundations, okay, to create enablers. And in fact, it is this playground we create with abundant bandwidth that is the foundation to allow the smartest people that exist, who are the faculty and the researchers and the students who come into these things we call universities and research labs, who in fact, when you unleash the constraints sitting around them, will do the work that defines the future. And as you look, as I said, at what has incubated out of the higher education environment, you could fill this slide up. As I said, virtually everything we do, including the fundamental notion of the marriage of IP and Ethernet, which has become the fundamental residential foundation that supports the current internet, which was all done in higher education, where we took these two, one technology that was built in the Defense Department for express purpose, and another one, Ethernet, that was pretty much kind of dead as in the marketplace at that point, that was developed around Xerox PARC. In fact, if you listen to Bob Metcalf, in support of a need that a set of universities had to do communications. But we're also a market maker. Nothing makes me angrier when I talk to people than my good colleagues at the incumbent providers or the commercial companies we work with who tell me, you're competing with us in our marketplace. It's exasperating. What I want to say to them is, you've got to be kidding. We created your marketplace. You look at an incumbent carrier, and you look at their revenue streams, and you add up the things that came out of our environment, broadband internet, email, the web, search, video, radio, broadcasting over the internet, instant messaging, all of these technologies are the things that they're making money from now. And so while there may be this very short-term view that somehow or other, we're set up in a way that we may take a little bit of business from them at times in order to create this enriched network community environment, virtually every dollar we spend goes to them. And virtually everything we do benefits them from the perspective of the businesses that they build around this. And frankly, we didn't take very much off the top of that. In point of fact, if we had only, the current global internet market, we'll talk about that a little bit later, if we only had just a tiny piece of that we could reinvest back in what we do, we could do our jobs much more effectively. And so, my sort of push to these guys is sort of, you got to trust us a bit here. We have a track record, okay? If you work with us, if you make investments in us, we will build new markets that you're going to have an opportunity to benefit from. The return on investment in R&E networking is probably the story of the century, of the next 2 centuries, in terms of the tiny amount of investment that went into creating a business. This 1.4 billion figure in the U.S. 1.4 trillion figure in the U.S. First of all, is a sort of a dated figure. I've seen figures that have been published by Forrester and some others in the last 6 months that have pushed the estimates of the current internet market globally in the $6 to $9 trillion area. And all this done on the basis of some very, very small investments that started in DARPA in the US years ago, started in the European universities, started around the world, that has created this extraordinary economic platform. We're now, though, if you look back and sort of say, okay, what other kinds of things have we achieved here and what can we do in the future? One thing is very, very clear, that if we had to procure the level of services we get, that we have underlying this global research marketplace environment over the last, say, 2 decades, if we had to acquire that as purely commercial managed services, and we had not disrupted that market with new models of procuring broadband services, I was going to say we would have spent orders of magnitude more money, but you all know we wouldn't have, right? You all know we work in budget-constrained environments. And so you all know that what we would not have been able to do is the extraordinary amount of innovation and service that we have delivered to the R&E community that has reaped this extraordinary innovation premium for the world that serves as the foundation, I think, of the economy of the future. And so in the US, and I know this is happening a lot in the European NRENs, in the South American NRENs, and others, those institutions from which we emerged have put some new challenges in front of us. And they've said, well, if you can achieve this kind of market aggregation effect in the networking space, okay, now we have a real challenge for you. Because in the total scheme of IT spend and education spend and research spend, we spend very little on networking. We spend a whole lot more on procuring other IT services and educating students and doing some research. And so the challenge that's been put in front of Internet 2 by our chief information officers and our presidents is, okay, interesting experiment you've done here with networking. It's brought us value, it's saved us money, it's gotten us more capacity. Now tackle the big ones. Help us figure out how to use this community-based model that you built in the National Research and Education Networks to go after the bigger issues. And so we've now turned our attention at Internet 2 to what we call Net Plus services, and I know our colleagues at SurfNet have Surf Connects, and Janet has programs and others do, the Janet Brokerage, but all across the global NREN leadership community, when we talk, we don't talk a lot about networks. Our conversations aren't dominated by networks, but increasingly by these new market aggregation business demands. We've also become knowledge multipliers. And to tell you the truth, I think that historically, if we can own our own story here and learn to tell it more effectively, that it's easily the case that when the history of the world is written, that the Internet will exceed any sort of infrastructure, technology-derived inflection point in the history of the world. And the remarkable thing now is that this infrastructure, these services that we've created, has shrunk the world. It's put knowledge at people's fingertips. It's enabling, and the remarkable thing about this is I think we all understand that you can't put knowledge in a box. You can't hide it behind a political boundary. You can't hide it behind a discipline. You can't hide it at a social class or an economic class. If we are able to deploy these network infrastructures that the research and education networks have developed. And I think all told, you know, when the historical story is told, this is where the greatest value of the work that we've done here will accrue. That is, assuring that all humanity around the world is capable of accessing the knowledge and the services they need to be able to establish sound, stable societies, governments, political and economic systems. And I'd go a step further. I would even argue that there is no other institution or no other movement that can do it better than the people in this room have done it and can do it in the future. Because we're an unbiased player here. You know, we bring the skill sets. We bring the capabilities. We stand in front of these extraordinary global educational and research institutions that have the power to transform the world. And we become the vehicle that opens all of that Pandora's box of knowledge and learning to the world. That's what NRENs do. And there are not other institutions, frankly, that are able to do this. Our universities can't do it without us. Governments can build infrastructure, but they're not very good at changing the status quo. Commercial players are very, very important. For-profit players are very, very important. But now realize that they have a different set of outcomes to maximize, right? They're trying to maximize revenue. They're trying to maximize return on value. We're trying to maximize value. And that's a very different proposition. And it's a great place to be located. We're also becoming an economic development engine. And it's amazing now how many of my colleagues at NRENs around the world are now being quite successful in getting funding, not just from the research and education enterprises, but from economic development investments. Because it's clearly understood, I believe, the role that the research and education networks play in starting this extraordinary virtuous cycle of innovation that passes through to the marketplace and doesn't just accelerate existing marketplaces, not just accelerate existing marketplaces, but in fact creates new marketplaces. And virtually every one of these marketplaces that we all live by, that we now see impacting society as completely as they do, emerged out of this environment we created. We are and need to continue to bear in mind, though, how we become transformational vehicles. One of my good colleagues, Dr. Molly Broad, who runs, she's been a university chancellor in the U.S. She's been involved with our community a long time. She now heads up an organization called ACE in the United States, which is the sort of advocacy organization for higher education in the U.S. And she and I talk a lot, and we were working on a project to sort of figure out how to better tell our story about the transformational impact that we've had on society through the incubation of the internet and the impact it's had. And she reflected on that, and a couple of years ago, she got up in front of our group in one of our keynotes and said, okay, I buy this. Now, when are we going to start transforming research and education? When are we going to really start using these technologies that we've developed, that we make available, these big, fast networks and these rich these technology expertise-rich communities we have? When are we going to start using that to really now begin to transform the research and education institutions around the world to be able to play in, to be able to be more effective in this rapidly transforming world? And so this transformational role, I think, we really see beginning to take shape as our institutions move into so many of these new places with big projects, with these big MOOC projects and others, where we have an extraordinary opportunity, I think, to be able to basically not just sort of turn these technologies outside, but to turn these technologies inside for transformational purposes. And I think the NRENs are going to play a very, very important role there. We're also a collaboration enabler. And, I said early on that what we do is about community. It's about community. But if you added up all of the staff that work for national research and education networks around the world, okay, you've probably captured only about 1/20th or less of the work that has gone into what we have accomplished because we have created this rich collaborative community. We have meetings like this. We do other things. Very few other science domains don't do this as well as we do it. Corporations can't do it as well as we do it because they get in trouble with their governments for collusion. We are intentional colluders, okay? And we show the value proposition not just of collaboration, but of collusion. And yet we still do it we still compete with each other. And these services that we've created through our NRENs have become a very important part of that. We're also very quickly now becoming a community developer. And in the United States, with our state partnership with our state and regional networks, we're now providing connectivity services to more than 50% of the community anchor institutions. These are K-12, these are school systems, community colleges, libraries, research parks, hospitals, medical providers, and so increasingly the NRENs are taking on this role as a community-based infrastructure, working to deliver to other public service institutions the same kind of extraordinary infrastructure and collaboration communities we have. And as we do surveys of who's providing services outside the R&E environment, almost every research and education network in the world is doing it, and it's beginning to take on extraordinary dimensions. It links back to this knowledge multiplier concept that I talked about earlier, and using our skills at community development to extend the community development model and extend our technology enterprises is very important. And then the last point I want to make here, NRENs create collaborative relationships in the international R&E communities that transcend cultures and outlast political regimes. National boundaries don't keep science controlled. They don't keep our NRENs controlled. At the same time, and Steve mentioned this morning, at the same time that we are watching national governments struggle with each other over relationships in scores of places, at the same time, we see the amount of science going on go up. The value proposition of this this global research and education network intersection of communities is as important as any global political process that is going on in terms of assuring a stable planet in the future. And we will have some work to do, I think, in assuring that these open, reliable avenues of communication continue to foster that safe haven for political dialogue and intellectual freedom. And if we can, and this is a good example of where the intersection with the technologists is very important, because if we keep inventing these technologies, we can invent them faster than governments can create policy to control them. And these communities of research and education networks are going to be, have been central to that process and are going to be. So my time's up. Again, I will say that this is an idiosyncratic, this is Dave Lambert's perspective on this. But I think overall, we have a tendency as a community to carry around a bit of an inferiority complex. We're always out holding our hands out, trying to get somebody to put a little bit of money in it, right? We're always trying to apologize for stepping on the toes of commercial providers. We're always trying to step through a minefield of agencies. But folks, what has happened here with the development of the NREN movement is powerful. What we can do in the future, if we guide these organizations and communities in the right direction, with the kind of leadership that we've seen all across our community for the last 2 decades. When the history of the world is written, what we did as part of this process will be seen as very, very important. So stay at it. So I thank you all very much for the opportunity to talk to you about my perspectives. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks very much for that very inspirational speech. Questions?
They just want lunch.
No, they can't. They can't get away that easily. So I'll ask you a question, Dave.
Yes.
So everything's perfect.
Yes.
So nothing needs to change. We're doing everything right now. Or is there at least, what is the most important thing that perhaps needs to change?
Well, let me. There are several points I could make. There is one I will make, and that is, going back to Irwin's slide, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And, as we move into these exciting and dramatic new opportunities that lie out there for us to have broader impact, to address core sort of societal issues through our NREN movement, I think, the thing that we simply have to make sure of is that we don't let our own culture eat our strategy here. That we have got to make these organizational entities transform themselves into new structures that are more flexible, that can move more quickly, that can mobilize their communities more quickly. And we've got to get exceedingly better than that. And I think that means 2 things. Number one, the organizations have to be more agile. They have to be better managed. They have to be focused. But it also says something about the community in which these communities in which these organizations exist. And that is, we need to spend, I think, a good more part of our time sort of understanding what we do to make sure that we're out there actively organizing these collaborations, not just building networks. It's not the physical network that has created this extraordinary transformation that I've talked about. It's the human network. It's the human network. It's the people who've done this. And what we have to do is make sure that we tend in mind the culture in a way that will enable us to move quickly and not become a barrier.
Right.
The technologies will take care of themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, question there.
This one?
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave, for the excellent presentation. For most of us running NRENs, we are really short of resources and find it very difficult to convince people about our impact. Are you suggesting that it is just that we haven't been telling our story right? And that's why we remain we continue having this inferiority complex?
I am saying that I think we've let other people steal our story. Okay? We've let, I go into meetings with big commercial companies who stand up in front of me and say, why are you guys in this business? We created this thing. We created this internet. They did not. Okay? They had it handed to them. They did a lot of work. They mortgaged their houses. They went out and borrowed money. They put their businesses at risk. But fundamentally, they had a success model handed to them. And so that's number one. Yes, we need to tell our story better. The other point I would make in relation to that is that this isn't, we're not a one-trick pony here. One of the things I've learned over time is obviously priorities of people who spend money, whether they're government or entrepreneurs, priorities change relatively quickly. What I think we haven't realized is we have a story for everyone here. If the government is about public services and providing public services, we've got a story to tell. If the government is about economic development, we've got a story to tell. If the government is about, competing globally in a technology space, we've got a story to tell. We have a story to tell that we don't use in as powerful a way as we could be using it to impact decisions being made about very, very scarce resources, or which is true in the developing world, or very, very plentiful resources. And so, yes, I don't think it's the only solution. I don't think it's going to solve the problem by itself. But I think the way we tell our story, the way we sell what we've done, the way we sell what we can do, is going to be very important to our ability to find the resources to be able to do it in the future. So, with my colleague CIOs, we sit around and say, okay, what do we do mostly? And I think the answer most of them would give you is we're salesmen. We spend our time trying to sell what we do in exchange for the resources to continue to do it and do it much more effectively and do it better.
Thank you. I was going to say that I think I could listen to Dave all day, but now he's admitted he's a salesman. I'm not. I'm not.
Now
so
you're
sure.
not so sure.